welcome to another thought-provoking episode of the Global Conversations webcast. I'm your host, Andre Darmanin, and today we embark on a fascinating journey exploring global and cultural differences in mental health. I am so honored to have my guest, the remarkable Taz Latif, joining me today. Taz's diverse experience has seen her take on roles as leading EDI in advertising, an educator, community builder, and public speaker. Taz is passionate about driving change, and she frequently shares her knowledge by participating in such events as the Diversity and Inclusion Leaders Race Summit and the Inclusion and Diversity Spring Summit. In today's episode, Taz will offer insights on the multifaceted aspects of mental health as observed all over the world. We will delve into the crucial role culture plays in shaping our understanding of mental health, along with the unique approaches taken by different global communities. Prepare yourselves for an eye-opening discussion that has the potential to change the way we view mental health across cultures. So sit back, relax, enjoy this informative adventure with Taz. Taz, welcome to having you here. I'm so honored and so blessed to have you here.
Oh no, the feeling's mutual, Andre. Honestly, I'm really blessed to be here. And in fact, you're telling your viewers to relax. I'm so chilled on this Friday and relaxed. I'm actually in my PJs. And for those of you watching that are wondering why on earth is this woman turning up in her PJs, in her jammies on a Friday, the initial time that Andre and I had a chat, I was doing stuff at home. I was in between. I was like, I want to make this call, but I just don't have time to change and I don't want to be late. And I just remember messaging you on LinkedIn saying, would you be really alarmed if I turned up in my Lion King PJs? But we're out here to decolonize and we don't have to wear smart clothes to be heard or seen. So I hope that my words won't have any less gravity being in my Lion King PJs with the Simba ears as well.
And that's funny. It's because, when I said chill, be yourself, when we first spoke, it was like, all right, okay, cool. You come with this. Did I expect it to happen a second time? Nope. But you know what? It is what it is. We're here. We're chill. We're both at home, doing our thing. And it's so, it's so great to have you, like I said. And, and the thing is, no matter what you wear, it's what comes out of your mouth that matters, right? Yeah. Especially in the world that we live in, we need to be chilled given what's going on. So let's get started here. When we first spoke a while back, it was about me listening to you on the what is your behavior podcast, as I mentioned to you a while back. And, just like your nature, at that time, and I think I mentioned to you that I couldn't stop laughing during that episode. And I'm like, and it was at the point where I was at the gym and I was afraid that I was going to drop a weight on my head because of that. Right. It was such a fun and enjoyable episode. And I was like, I got to have this girl on my podcast. So I mean, it's like I said, it's an honor to have you and to listen to and watch all you've done on social media and the work that you've done to this point. And so aside from that one podcast and aside from the little introduction, tell everyone about who you are and what makes you you.
Yeah, for sure. So I am... What am I? So I realized quite recently that it was okay to be lots of different things and not one thing. And what I mean by that is actually the What Is This Behavior podcast is one of the co-hosts is a really good friend of mine called Ruben. We've co-hosted things together. We've been on stage together. We've hosted workshops and so on. And he's been a really great co-facilitator and a really good sound of reason for me. And we were just exploring sort of identity and talents. And I realized that there's that old saying, jack of all trades, but master of none. And I just remember growing up reading a lot of like self-help stuff and people saying, you need to master one like trade and you need to be really good at this one thing and that will take you really far in your career. And what I found is that that's not the truth for everyone. And I'm unlearning quite a lot about the fact that actually I can be, you can refer to it as a multi-hyphenate, a multi-potentialite, whatever it is, jack of all trades. I have that. And so when people ask me who I am, I'm like, who am I? I'm someone who loves to cook. I love to bring people together. I get called an expander quite a lot. Community is at the heart of everything that I do, Andre. From what I do at work and building community at a grassroots level to everything I do outside of work. I would call myself an activist, a humanitarian. I would call myself a cat mum. I have 4 cats. I'm a daughter, a wife. I'm a daughter-in-law. A sister, and all of those things put together. But ultimately, I am someone who deeply, deeply cares about the state of the world. And that is what fuels me, is the greater social good is what fuels me. And I think that's at the center of everything I do. And that is, I discovered the concept of ikigai several years ago, and I explored it, and I found a lot of parallels between ikigai as a Japanese concept and a beautiful concept, as well as my faith as a Muslim woman. And that really is at the forefront. So I would say everything that I do for the world is through the lens of Islam and the lens of who I am as a Muslim woman. So yes,
and,
lots of labels.
No, exactly. And so before we get into your career journey and your life, etc., as you briefly mentioned, tell us something that someone wouldn't normally know about you.
All right. So I knew this was going to come up, right? And when you sent over some of the prep and like the logistics with the link and everything, I looked at it this morning and I was like, something someone doesn't know about me. What? How? And then I really struggled with it because I thought I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm quite open about my identity. I'm private about certain things, as everyone is. But then, so what I did was I texted my husband and I said, babe, what's something that people wouldn't normally know about me? Right. So I've got the conversation open in front of me, very cracked screen protector. What's something that people would normally? And he said, you have a strawberry birthmark, which is true. So it's like this red V on my forehead, which you can only see in flash photography.
Yeah.
He said you were born with a white hair, which is true. Bang in the middle of my head when I was born, I had a white hair. They continue to get whiter and whiter as I get older, obviously. I don't like mushrooms because I'm allergic to them. He says that you're very kind-hearted. You'd go to the ends of the world for those you love. You're the granddaughter of a trekking nomad and the granddaughter of the founder of Brick Lane, one of the founders of Brick Lane Mosque. And you have an unsatiable desire for French fries. So that's the list. And the one about my granddad is probably the most... my granddad was a legend. So my maternal grandfather, in my language, we call him Nana. My mum's father, he, came to the UK on his own, orphaned at a young age. And he literally bought and sold like kerosene. And the little profit that he had, I think he came with something like £100 to the UK. And ended up, having a leather factory in the heart of the rag trade in the East End. Was one of the co-founders of Brick Lane Mosque, which is an iconic building and still, houses loads of worshippers. But when we actually spoke to him about his history, he spent a lot of time traveling because of the fact that he was orphaned. And that then somehow showed up and explained why. And I didn't know that till much later in life, but it's why I've climbed mountains and I love trekking and I love the outdoors and things like that. Things that aren't not like everyday commonplace in British South Asian culture. It's just like, you're a girl, why are you climbing a mountain? Stay at home.
And that was the thing is, as we had our chat, I guess was a month ago or so, you met and you alluded to right now, what made you climb, what was it, Kilimanjaro, I think it was, or was it? Yeah. So what made you do that? Like, what inspired you for that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to be really vulnerable and honest and share this here. And I know it's much to the distaste or discomfort of a lot of people in my community, but I speak quite openly about my divorce. So I've been married before. I am happily married now, but I've been married before. And coming off the back of that, what I found was I felt a lot of bitterness and resentment towards the toxic parts of South Asian culture that actually conflicted with my faith as a Muslim. And I've always had a bit of a rebel in me. I was jumping the school fence at 14 to join political protests, like in the local area, and being reprimanded for it. But then on the flip side, I was like chair of the student council. So I was like trying to have the best of both worlds. And I think coming out of that relationship, and this is like, there's no bad blood towards my ex-husband and his family. But I think I was in a state of rebellion and in a state of wanting more. And I just wanted to let go of all the material things. And I just wanted to be at one with nature. I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to prove that I could do it. And it was one of the toughest things you will ever do. Well, for me specifically. And if you head over to BritishMuslimTV.com and search Conquer Kilimanjaro. There's a documentary on a few of us that went.
Mhm.
And if you really want to see me with snot and tears down my face, crying about why I'm here, having no shower in 7 days and climbing this mountain,
Yeah.
feel free to go and do that. But it was one of the most incredible and life-changing experiences of my life. Yeah, I'd highly recommend it.
And, that's an awe-inspiring story that you've told. And yes, vulnerability is stuff that we do in our, or we advocate in the work that we do. And it's, it's very important that we do this. And a lot of people need to be more open with themselves. And, I'm so honored to have listened to this story multiple times, and now even more so here today. And so, as we talk about your life journey, and I know you've spoken about your granddad. How did that all, your divorce, all of that, inspire you in the journey of your career to date, and of course where you're at now in your career? So talk us through that, and tell me a little more about bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. So I think even from when I was young, one of the key things I remember in school was always being told. So Taz is short for Mumtaz, so all of my family call me Mumtaz, and the school teachers that used to pronounce it Mumtaz. So in school, it would always be like, Mumtaz, you're talking too much. Mumtaz, we're gonna have to separate you from your group. And I'd always be put on a table on my own because I would talk too much. And I went on to become a teacher eventually, and that taught me a lot about how the system isn't suited to everyone. It's not the education system, particularly here in the UK, in my experience, just wasn't very inclusive. And what I found was that I was often quite stifled, and I always had a bit of rebel in me. And being from a family of really strong women, really, really strong women, like I've gotten like an OBE winning foster carer aunt. My mum's been in education for 20 years. Another one of my aunts has been teaching for like almost 2 decades now. One of them used to run a business. Another one's like a makeup artist that's been featured on like Asiana magazine. Like you name it, there's like the women in my family are incredible. And so I saw them and I thought, okay, that obviously drove my passion for a career. I've got really supportive parents who wanted me to go to university and do all of that good immigrant daughter stuff, and have a career. And I was coerced into teaching, excuse me, because there were still remnants of what I would call old school patriarchy. I don't disagree with everything in the patriarchy, but I think it can show up in really dangerous ways. And there was this thing around, well, you're a woman, you're going to have kids. And so actually, if you become a teacher, you get the school holidays off when your kids will be older, and it will just fit your lifestyle. And people think that this is the case, but honestly, the way the system is set up, the amount of admin and the amount of suffering that the kids go through at the hands of a system that isn't designed for them really, really upset me. In the end, I didn't want to be a part of it. So in 2015, after pursuing a career in teaching and teaching between here and the Midlands, between London and the Midlands, where I'm based, I decided to quit. And it was a really last minute decision. One day I just felt like I had reached the end of it. I was working in a school where I would say that the head teacher, the headmistress, had a lot of problems. She had a lot of issues, and unfortunately was taking it out on a lot of the staff, and really unjust practices. I witnessed a lot of malpractice, and it made me lose hope, because I thought these teachers, these head teachers, these figureheads in education, they're meant to be custodians of good practice. They're meant to be the beacon of like what good education is. And we're meant to be in Great Britain, which is meant to be, thriving and so on. And it really broke me. And so I quit in 2015, which feels like a lifetime ago. It's almost 10 years ago, actually. And I didn't have a backup plan. And I just quit. And I said, I refuse to be a part of this. And one of the turning points for me, which I'll share with you, was I worked in an area at the time that had a lot of children from a low socioeconomic background like me. And there was a lot of children whose English was their second language. So I had a lot of Romanian students, Slovakian kids, Somalian children, Bangladeshi, Indian, Pakistani, Nigerian and Ghanaian kids in that school. And there was a young child that came in, and we were doing a lesson on art. They were young, they were about 7 years old. And we were encouraging them to use primary colours, red, yellow and blue, to paint a scene of the beach. And so I did a demo at the front. And there was one child that looked at me and said, "Miss, my paints aren't working." And in my mind, I was like, what does he mean? They're watercolour palettes. I said, "I'm just coming over. Give me 1 second." I walk over and I see he's putting a dry brush on dry watercolours and trying to paint. And he doesn't understand why it's not working. And I asked him, I said, have you never used paints before, sweetheart? And he was like, No. And I thought, how did this child manage to go through this many years, 4 years of education, the schooling
Mm-hmm.
system, and no one's picked up on this? And plus a bit of a fallout with the head teacher, and I quit. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Please get a cover teacher in. I'm leaving in 2 days, and I left. And there was no turning back. And the majority of my work in school had been around inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And it really stemmed from seeing how difficult it was for our communities to integrate into Britain. My granddad having racist thugs taking his religious hat off his head and stamping on it. And this is a man who had a walking stick.
Mm-hmm.
Being mocked for accents, not being able to find the foods of your culture when we were growing up. That was really tough. And I'm quite lucky that I grew up in a diverse part of East London that, eventually became even more diverse than when my grandfather was here. But a lot of his experiences, a lot of what my grandmother went through, the loneliness that she experienced, I didn't want to live in a world where I would fast forward 30 years into my life and I'm still having the same struggles as my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother and my grandfather, and the same for my paternal grandparents who were based in Bangladesh but visited. And so a lot of my frustration, a lot of the time I've spent in my career, I've operated on rage, and it's not healthy. And it's been really tough to unlearn that. And one of my really good friends, actually, her name's Nafisa. She runs a company called Amalia for Muslim women. One day I just confided in her and I said, Nafisa, I'm struggling. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm really struggling. I don't know how to frame or channel my frustration. And I want to make change, and I just feel let down by the systems, and I feel like the challenge is too big. And she said there's 2 types of people that make change. There's the ones that sit on the outside and try to kick the doors down, and they do it from a place of rage, and their anger means that they're not invited to have a seat at the table. Or there's those that recognize how the system works, and they ensure that they work their way to get a seat at the table and then have that influence. And that for me completely reframed. I no longer felt guilty for my rage, but I realized I needed to channel it in a different way. And so sometimes when people say to me, Taz, why do you do so much for this organization? Or why you're burning yourself out doing X, Y, Z? And I said, if I'm still dealing with the same challenges my grandma dealt with coming here in the 60s, everything she dealt with in the 70s, my mum was born in the 60s, we haven't changed. Nothing's changed. It was all for nothing. And that's really what, the journey of both sides of my grandparents. And even although my mum was born here, my dad wasn't. And his experience of the war in Bangladesh, the British Raj, what happened with the Pakistani army and everything, that really drives me to want to create change in a better world, because those things feel like a very long time ago. But I realized that my dad experienced that just in the 70s and 80s. He was at the forefront of some of the race riots in Brick Lane in East London in the 1980s. And that really fuels me to want to create change. And the biggest thing for me on a final sentence around your question is that when I working in DE&I, often it's my job to teach people about the privilege they have. That's a really tough conversation. People don't like being told they've got privilege. I got told I had privilege a while back, and I was so resistant. I was like, dude, what are you on about? I'm brown, I'm Muslim, I'm a woman. I can't even run in the evenings in the streets of London without fearing for my life. How can I possibly be privileged? And in unlearning all of that, I've then had to coach and mentor and educate people on how their privilege shows up and how they can use it for good, rather than it being a tool for blaming them for something. And I realized that I look at my dad, for example, and English wasn't his first language. He had to come and learn it. He was from a low socioeconomic background. His parents didn't support him to go to university because their situation meant he had to go straight to work at 17. I have all of these options and endless opportunities. And if I'm not using them for good, what is the point? And I know as a woman of faith, I'll just be answerable to God one day. He'll ask me one day what I did for the world, and I don't want to turn up to him empty-handed. And that's it.
No, that's a wonderful story that you shared about your journey, and this is really important, especially with our work in terms of you hear stories about intergenerational trauma, cultural trauma, burnout. Why we get into this work, and I mean, I can share a lot of the similar sentiments with you in terms of why I got into this work, right? Coming from planning, listening to people say, "Oh, things can't be done here," or they don't want to take a risk for fear of reprimand or whatever it is, and then I was just like, look, enough is enough. Like I can't sit here and say to myself that this is something that I'd like to continue with, right? Without changing the system. And I think that's the most important part. But in that whole journey, as you said,
Yeah.
this is, it's the system that has been the problem. And,
Yeah.
it's fighting that system, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I've gone through, like, I came out of teaching and I thought, how can I put my understanding of inclusion, my understanding of how education works, and how can I was working at a grassroots level, but I felt I couldn't make the change from the inside. So I left and then went into sort of inclusive recruitment. I'm thinking, if I can start to change the way that we hire people into positions of power, the change in that influence will then trickle down the system. And I realized just how broken some of the recruitment practices we have across the world are. And even in one of the jobs, I've always felt like a bit of a social pariah, like speaking out on things. I remember when Grenfell happened, and again, I'll disclose this like really vulnerably, but I just remember being really vocal on it on my social media. And I had a few colleagues. It was a private social media account, didn't have my full name, didn't have my face, didn't state where I worked, completely like, neutral profile. And I got reprimanded for posting things around some of the media coverage on how it was potentially an ethnic cleansing project. That was one of the last, council blocks or like social housing blocks left in that particular borough. And it's quite a wealthy borough, very affluent, families live there. And I was reprimanded and told if I don't, I'd be given a warning. I then continued because I was like, if you're going to fire me for standing up for poverty and the absolute, like the sheer ignorance from our government, then that's fine. And I remember being reprimanded for it. And I remember my manager at the time putting me into a room and he was like, you're in a very senior position here. I was the director of growth. I looked after diversity. So you're in a very senior position here. They were quite a new startup. And he said, you are making this about politics. And I said, poverty and wealth is politics. Politics dictates who earns what money and who lives where and where my parents can afford to live and where I grew up. It dictates the wealth of any neighborhood. And he was like, well, you're criticizing our government. And I said, no, maybe you voted them in. Therefore, I'm criticizing your government. This isn't an our. And the thing that really shook me and made me realize that even when you get into positions of power, sometimes there's still another layer above you that makes it really difficult for your voice to be heard, was when he leaned in and said to me, if the people in that building didn't want to burn to death, they shouldn't have been taking money off the government and be lazy. They should have gone and got a job and bought a house like I did. And what do you say to someone who's managing? The majority of us were working class in that. We were from a low socioeconomic background. It was one of the most diverse companies I'd worked at. But ironically, the few that were in the position of power just didn't understand it. And I then went on to another role after that. And within 6 months got fired for calling out racism in the business. And it was a co-founder of a tech recruitment business that was overlooking Chinatown in London. Our offices were in Leicester Square. And when the Hare Krishna, I don't know if you're familiar with Hare Krishna group, they have a headquarters near Leicester Square and just off Oxford Circus. And they take to the streets, they chant just like our Christian aunties would preach in my local area when I was growing up, just like the Muslim brothers would give dawah in our local area. They don't do any harm. They're just doing their job, what they feel God has assigned them to do. And Hare Krishna would come out with their drums and bells and chant, not causing harm to anyone. And I specifically remember the co-founder sitting there, who was my manager at the time. I was like second in line from the CEOs and co-founders. And I was the only person of color there, bar one guy who was mixed race. And I remember him telling me how he went to an ashram and he was like really in touch with, Buddhism as a religion, and he's really interested in like Hinduism as a concept and reincarnation, even though he grew up in a Jewish background. And then 10 minutes later, Hare Krishna went past and he looked out the window and he goes, these crazy fuckers. I just looked at him like, I'm sorry, what? He said, we all know they're crazy. It's like, you do realize you just praised their faith and you're now insulting them for practicing in a different way. And for me, it was just, it's almost like your radar for it is so loud and you feel like you're going crazy because the people around you don't see it, and they all just affirm each other. And that groupthink is really dangerous. It's something that's, it fuels me to keep going, because I'm like, if I'm the minority, I have to keep speaking until it ripples out into the world. But it's tough in these streets, Andre. It's tough.
No, I know. And it's so interesting as I'm hearing you talk about, as we mentioned earlier, about trauma, but also social mobility and class, and how that takes shape especially when it comes to mental health. And, I know you shared a story with me earlier about, before our conversation here, in that you talked about how your mental health took a toll.
Oh yeah.
You know, I'm not, I don't know if you want to share that right now. But I think, like you said, you're vulnerable. So, I mean, even if it's something that's, that you have to hold back on, I mean, fine. But, there's probably a double-edged sword, or it's doubly effective when it comes to mental health and culture. So, you know, walk, tell me more, or tell us more about, your circumstances in terms of what happened. Because when you shared it with me, I was just like, I was heartbroken when I heard about what happened, how it took a toll on you, the burnout and all that. So, like, how does that affect you in so many different ways?
Yeah, for sure. So I like, just off the bat as well, I think the first thing that I have to say is, for anyone that's working in social impact, social justice, diversity and inclusion, equity work, belonging, community, all of that, if you have the budget, or you have the courage to ask your employer for the budget, like, go to therapy, like, have it paid for by the company. One of the agencies I worked with would give us like 6 therapy sessions a year, and then we would have to top up the other 6 for like once a month. And it's something that, God, mental health in this space it can be really challenging. And it depends also which types of organizations you work in, because what I find is that even though there are, the way that mental health is socialized in different cultures is obviously different. Like, I'm from a South Asian culture.
Right.
It's like unheard of. And on top of that, when you couple South Asian culture with religion, it's like, you just need to pray more, Taz. You know what it is? You're not on your deen right now. You're not praying to God enough. And it's really tough to explain that, no, that there's actually a chemical imbalance in my body that's causing me to feel this way, and it's being influenced by external factors. And once I address those factors, perhaps I can focus on my prayers better. I'm not going to abandon my prayers and so on. So I think it's really tough. But even if we look at it from the grand scheme of things, a lot of organizations don't give mental health the gravity that they give to physical health.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I said, look, I've broken my foot, I can't commute into the office. Oh, no problem. Yeah, work from home. You've got your laptop. And if I say, I actually can't face people right now, my anxiety is getting really bad,
Mm-hmm.
you're reprimanded for it, or you're thought to be unfit for the role. And, I don't have the studies on hand, but there's so many studies that show the effects of working in D&I and the turnover rate. And I'm a bit bruised from corporate DEI, if I'm completely honest, because I think there's this illusion of change. There's this illusion that they've created a space where you can go in and actually make a difference. But honestly, when I tell you it's an illusion, for the most part, and I have a huge community of friends that work in D&I, they've either burnt out, they've decided they're never going back into corporate DEI again, or a full-time DEI role. They only want to consult from the outside. They'd rather be in community work and do things at a grassroots level and actually make change. Or they go in and do the job, but they spend an awful amount on excessive self-care, and it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking like literally therapy, CBT, somatic exercise sessions to like release the trauma from their body. And I think it's twice as bad when you're from a background where you've already had to deal with those generational traumas. So me going into a workplace and having to deal with rich white men at the top who think that their jokes are funny, but actually they're Islamophobic, or actually they're racist, or actually they're sexist, and them not understanding. It's like reliving all the things that I was already living, coming from a culture where I know from the wider community, not necessarily from within my family, but from the wider community, people taking the mick out of women, or cussing them for having too much of a career, or commenting on their physique, or the classic one in a lot of cultures being around blaming women for the way they're dressed for why they've been attacked or assaulted. And it's like, why are we not teaching men that it's not okay to attack, rather than policing how women dress? So I think there's still so much work to be done in this sphere. And I reached burnout this year, and I'm actually wrapping up a role with the organization I'm at. And the burnout was something that, burnout isn't something that happens overnight, Andre. It's and I'm speaking from my experiences here, and I hope that, it doesn't diminish anyone else's experiences of it, but it's a slow burn. It's a really, really, really slow burn. And by the time you reach it, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had done more to prevent myself from getting into it. But the thing that helped me alleviate the pressure that I put on myself was that earlier this year around May time, I had a full-on panic attack in the office, and my brother had to come and pick me up. I couldn't even get on a train. It was horrific. And I didn't understand that it was a panic attack until about 2 days later. I was like retching, sweating, crying, felt like I couldn't breathe. I was like, and in that moment, you feel like you're going to die. And I'm like, I would call myself quite a brave person. Like, I've done skydiving. I'm quite an adrenaline junkie. I've, run marathons. I've climbed Kilimanjaro. I get on stage for a living, but I was reduced to a person who couldn't even leave the house because I would get into my head that if I leave, I'm going to fall so sick that I'm going to die. And it's so irrational when you say it out loud now. But when you're living in that in your head, it's like, and how did I get there? It was because I'm in a role that wasn't fully supported. I was, expected to undo for companies that have been around for 20, 30 years. They're expecting you to come in and be like, oh, we want you to look after gender pay gap. We want you to support our ERGs. Oh, we want you to do something about representation at senior level. And I'm like, okay, so what are you going to do? Fire your most senior people? You want me to get a brown woman to come and work in here for her to come in, get traumatized and leave 12 months later because you haven't built the culture to allow her to thrive. And it's textbook, it really is textbook. So the burnout was, it was wild. And a colleague of mine, she's an incredible force for good. And I hope she doesn't mind me naming her, but her name's Joanna. And she works in sustainability. And so I was technically we were on a very similar team in my last role. And she pulled me aside when she saw the state of my burnout. And I had that panic attack, and she pulled me aside and she said, Taz, I've been through this. It culminated in me having to have 6 months off work. And all I'm going to say to you is that in our line of work, in social justice, in climate, in people and planet focus work, nobody will ever tell you that you've done enough. So you need to take care of your health, and you need to know when to slow down. And I thought that if there's ever a truer sentence that was said about the work that we do, I was really grateful for her to share that with me. And so I've now taken it upon myself where I'm like, okay, how much of this is feasible in the short term? And is this solely my responsibility? And for the work that we do, Andre, sometimes we have to just acknowledge that it's not going to happen in that organization or in that team or in that conversation. Some people's hearts aren't open to change, and we just have to accept that. Otherwise, you'll burn out and you'll blame yourself.
As I'm listening to this story, it resonates with me a lot, because especially considering the fact that, I had an earlier conversation about coaches within the profession. How do we deal with burnout? And, even with me going through, being around people, or, being around organizations where it's like, you're the fixer, right? You're the one who's supposed to be doing this. And sometimes sometimes you're not, you don't have the tools to do it. And so you tend to blame yourself. For me, there's some days I lose sleep because I'm overthinking about what I need to do next. Am I worried I'm going to have a job next? Those are the things. And a lot of us, like you said, at the end of the day, either move to another organization, and maybe it happens again somehow, some way. Maybe they'll be fine, or they just end up doing it consulting, right? And this is a common story, right? And I remember reading an article, I think it was last month, where Harvard Business Review was talking about how do you detach yourself from the work that you do versus who you are personally, right? So, and I think in our work, it's a little tough, especially when it's, like you said, especially when it comes to justice work. And so these are, it's so hard, because when you're trying to break down systems, you're trying to break down silos, you're trying to build relationships with people. There's a lot that goes on, and you can't do it by yourself, especially, in a large organization that most of us work in. So, and then on top of that, there's those cultural differences, especially when, these organizations were built on, white, male, cisgender, etc. Breaking all those silos and trying to put them together is just, it's disheartening. It's there's just a lot of factors involved in this. And then, going back to the cultural side of things, as someone who's biracial, who grew up exactly like you in a lower income housing, if you will, these are the things that play out for me. And yet, within our cultures, like you said, we're told to be brave because this is not what we do. So, how, I guess then, what are your thoughts on those situations in terms of bravery or whatnot, and how do people get over that? Right, it's hard when especially when you're immersed in this world, but also it's difficult, especially no matter if you're in EDI or not. But what are those what have you experienced when it comes to those challenges, not just personally, but also what you've seen around in your work, and what are the perceptions and how do we deal with it?
So one of the key parts of the work that I do, and although this is client facing, I also bring a lot of that into the community stuff that I do, and the not free training is the wrong word, but I take what I teach to corporates on a paid capacity and I bring it into my communities for free to empower them and ensure that they have access to it, because I don't want money to be a barrier for a lot of people. And one of the things that I've taught, and I have an entire workshop on it, is the type of ally that we all want to be. And hatred is taught, right? And I don't believe for a second that any child comes into this world as a newborn crying into the world and has hate for a particular group of people in their heart. And it's taught and it's socially conditioned. To me, it's a form of brainwashing to hate a community that much. And so everyone has the capacity for allyship, and everyone, in my opinion, humans are inherently good people, but systems around us teach us to be selfish. Capitalism, for example, teaches us to be selfish and inwards, and to be competitive. So one of the things in that workshop is focusing on what type of ally do you want to be? And I take figures from history, and I give examples of, look, you can take an academic route, and if studying and memorizing information and regurgitating that information into crowds is what is your strength, that is a form of allyship in itself. If you are someone who doesn't like taking the front stage and you'd rather sit back and actually have a one-to-one conversation with someone, there's huge impact in that. I could have a conversation with one young student who will then go on to become the Prime Minister of the UK, or who becomes the president one day. And we shouldn't discount those one-to-one conversations. There's other people who are like, well, actually, I'm not great at public speaking and I can't articulate anything, even though I don't even want to have a conversation about it, but I can build the tech to help you get this message out to the world, and I'm going to sit here and code and donate my skills in that way. And so I guess what we have to accept with this type of work is that we can't all have the same capacity and the same ability and the same outcome and the same effect on the world. And it takes a while for us to reason with that because of something called shame. And often when I feel I haven't done enough, I feel shame. I feel embarrassed. I feel like I haven't done enough. I feel like a sellout. I feel like my community will hate me and so on. But really and truly, I have to acknowledge. So for example, my husband is like the admin guy in the house. He's great at admin. He's got a very framework oriented brain. He loves a spreadsheet. I cannot stand a spreadsheet. It's like the last thing I want to see in my life. Please don't give me a spreadsheet. Yeah, don't give it to me. I don't want it. And so we lean on each other's strengths, and just like you would in any relationship. So I think, for anyone listening that does, justice work, social impact work, and works in the EDI space, you have to remember what your capacity is. And I can't blame someone for not speaking up if I don't know what their entire contribution to a cause has been. And, recent events in the world, we're seeing it unfold before us, and people are being blamed for not speaking up or not using their platform in the right way. But we have to think about what we can do best. And if that means you're a serial retweeter or reposter, or actually you're really good at designing content, or perhaps you're the person that goes to the local stores and has a conversation with them about their place as a local tradesman or a local tradeswoman and what that means for a particular cause, and so be it. If you prefer volunteering in a school and having a conversation with young people and encouraging them and inspiring them, that's what your purpose is in this cause. So with any part of social impact, I think bravery is important. We have to, the way I see it is that again, going back to like the same struggles, if I'm still experiencing the same racism that my grandmother experienced when she was here, and that my grandfather, and the same Islamophobia, enough hasn't changed. And with the level of privilege I have and access to information and, you know, access to technology with English as my first language, growing up in a 2-parent household, having access to books, clean water and all of that, I do have a level of responsibility. And I know I'm not going to be everyone's favorite person for saying that, but we do have a level of responsibility to humanity and to the world. But in order for us to be effective at making that change, we need to understand what our capacity is. And until you embrace that, you're just going to be misfiring. You're just going to be throwing things at a wall and hoping something sticks, you know?
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
So knowing all this, experiencing all of this, what would you do different now? And what would you tell people, you know, in this work, you know, considering what you've gone through, and what would you do differently at this time?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good question. I think I would, if I could go back in time, I would try to channel my rage earlier, because I spent a lot of time being angry at the world and at systems. And even sometimes the way that I have to navigate the world as, you know, as a woman of color, as a Muslim, as a working class person, so on, who's not, you know, wasn't privately educated and so on. So, and I spent a lot of time being angry around that. And I think I could have put that energy to much better use. So I think number one is channeling my rage in a different way. I would have done that differently. Second is that I would have built my support community a lot earlier. They have been the source of so much energy, like inspiration, motivation, hope, and just like absolute beacons of change. And like, I've held events before where, you know, there's been events unfolding in the world, and we've come together, not to fundraise, not to be activists, not to think what's our next political move, not to think of which MP we're going to lobby next, but simply to come together and collectively grieve over what's happening in the world, and just share that through poetry and expression. And, you know, and the fundraising is always secondary, but I think I would have benefited from that a lot earlier on. Whereas what I did was I overemphasized the loneliness that I was feeling as a change maker. And what I mean by that is, you know, sometimes my extended family specifically, and even, you know, and not to disrespect my father or anything, but even he doesn't always sometimes understand my passion for activism. He's like, why are you doing this? You're killing yourself. Just donate the money. Why are you climbing a mountain? You know, what do you mean you jumped out of a plane? Just like, how much was it? £500 fundraiser? Yeah, I'll give that. It's fine. You stay safe. And I'm like, no, Dad, I want to be a free bird and explore the world. And, you know, even some of my extended family don't understand the desire to want to create change. And what that in turn does is make you feel like a social pariah. It makes you feel like you're the only one that's screaming into a black hole and nobody else is understanding the gravity of the situation. And I doubled down a bit too much on that loneliness. Growing up, I felt, you know, I was always told that, oh, you know, you are different, Taz, or you've got a different heart. I've had 4 therapists in my life. All of them have told me that I've got a different heart in some form or another. And so does that mean that I should, and you know, I wallowed on it. You know, there was a lot of self-pity around it. I was like, oh, I'm too different. The world I don't fit into the world. And, you know, I'm just angry at the world. When really what I should have done is been like, wow, God's given me this gift. And maybe I see things differently to the people around me. But there's also a massive community of people who see the world the same that I do. And actually all I needed to do was to connect the dots, bring us together so that we can move forward. So those are the two main things. And number 3 is just probably the third one is just investing more in, I don't really like the term self-care. I feel like it's a bit cliche. Yeah. But when I say self-care, I don't mean like face masks and spa day on a Friday, because let's be real, that's not like accessible to everyone. But by self-care, I just mean giving myself grace for the things that I can't control.
Yeah.
Looking, you know, valuing my mental health earlier on, I think would have gone a long way. And being unafraid to say when I need help. I think many of us that work in social justice, we have quite an unhealthy savior complex. And mine is also double layered or multi-layered from the fact that, like, I'm an elder sibling, I'm the eldest daughter in an immigrant household. We're like people pleasing, saviors that think we need to fix the world and fix everything. And I think if I had acknowledged earlier on what my capacity was for it, I wouldn't have burnt out the way that I did. But I have learned a lot from it. So yeah, those are the 3 things. Don't operate on rage. Find your community and your tribe a lot earlier so that you can push forward for justice. And the third one, just giving myself more grace early on in the form of self-care.
Yeah. You know, I'm listening to this and there's so many similarities especially given the fact that I'm the eldest sibling and we always want to save the world. Right. So I'm just in awe as listening to all these similarities coming from you. And it's like, we want to make things right, but there's only so much we can control in our lives. Right.
Yeah.
Especially given the systems that we have been in for so long, and dismantling those systems is very hard work, because it's been hundreds of years in the making versus what we're trying to do now. So all I want to say is thank you again, Taz, for being my guest, my esteemed guest in this, being vulnerable. Listening to you was I can hear your passion. I can hear your also your pain, given the fact of what you've gone through. But now things are getting better. Things are looking on the bright side, and a lot of us need to take notice in terms of that. And I thank you for this, and I really appreciate it. So I just want to end off with a couple of last little things, just for fun, because this is it's not all doom and gloom here, right? We're all chill, and whatnot. But so as we're going through these journeys, what is the one song that kind of brings you joy right now?
Oh, I'm so indecisive. What is the one song that brings me joy right now? Do you know what? I'm gonna actually open up my Spotify, because I've got my playlist that I just add things to, like, as I go along.
Yeah.
And where'd it go? Woo! Where is it? Oh, trust my Spotify to put my playlist, the one I listen to every day, right at the bottom of the list. And the most recently added songs that I have been listening to is actually, ironically, so I don't speak fluent Arabic. I can read Quranic Arabic, because I taught to read the Quran as Muslims, like, growing up. But there have been like a multitude of like Arabic songs that I've been listening to recently, from an artist called Distinct, which I've been listening to quite a lot. And also I got completely addicted to the Mona Lisa song recently. I don't know if you've heard it before. Chris Brown and Loj.
I might have heard it, but yeah.
Mona Lisa, yeah. And honestly, I've been listening to a lot of lo-fi as well, because of the anxiety. So I'm like, that actually brings me a lot of peace, and helps me focus a lot more. So yeah, I would say those are the ones. But Distinct has been at the top of my playlist. There's something really celebratory about the rhythm and the beat, and there's something really passionate in the music that I listen to when it's from other cultures, and I don't know what it is, and I always feel a pull to music from other cultures. So yeah, that's the headspace that I'm in right now. Yeah.
No, that was great to hear. And yeah, so as we close off,
sure,
and me being honored and blessed to have spoken with you and gotten to know you over the last little while today, and and before, and more than likely into the future, how can people reach you on social media?
Oh yeah, for sure. So you can reach me on LinkedIn if you want to talk about DE&I stuff. There's only 2 Taz Latifs on LinkedIn. Super easy to find. The other account's like a dead account. So if you type in Taz Latif, I'll come up straight away. Drop me a DM. That's how we met as well. You drop me a DM after What Is This Behavior? And pretty much everything that I work on, all the community projects that I work on, are all on there. And that's probably the best place to reach me for now. My website is pending. Don't tell my friends who have been pushing me to get it out there for a while. But if the website's up before you publish this, I'll send you the link. We can take it. Well.
Thank you, Taz, for this wonderful conversation. I really, again, I really appreciate your candor, your candidness, and whatnot. So until next time, everyone, we'll have another guest speaking about everything and all things EDI. And don't forget to like, subscribe the YouTube channel, or on Spotify and search for Global Conversations. Until then, I bid you adieu.